Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. Today, I'd like to take this opportunity to speak to you about a very special documentary film that I was so fortunate to have been able to watch. It is a work from the year 2025, so this year as of the time of making this video, and it is from the filmmaker Richard Green. The name of the work is I Know Catherine, the Log Lady. This work focuses in on an incredibly special and remarkable talent who passed away in 2015, so several years ago now. That person is Catherine Coulson. Catherine Coulson had so many remarkable achievements and accomplishments in her life, in her career. One such achievement and accomplishment is her portrayal, her remarkable portrayal of the iconic character who is known as the Log Lady in the brilliant series Twin Peaks, Mark Frost and David Lynch series Twin Peaks. Catherine Coulson portrayed the Log Lady very consistently throughout the work, including the most recent iteration of that series being what's known as The Return. Not long after she made her performance in that work, she passed away due to illness. So this work, this film, this documentary from Richard Green focuses in on the life and times of Catherine Coulson, in particular giving emphasis or giving a spotlight to her association with Twin Peaks and anecdotes that also surround those final moments of her performance as the Log Lady, and also her very personal and intense battle with her own illness. It can be described as a documentary, but it can also be described as a kind of loving portrait. It is a biographical portrait of Catherine Coulson, the artist, from her days as a child growing up and her family life, leading to her choices, her life choices, her career choices that led her to the world of theater and the arts and films, and meeting up with many people along the way, including, I should say, Richard Green himself, which he acknowledges, and also David Lynch and others in that orbit. Now, I admit I might be coming at this from a certain point of bias, because I am a big fan of David Lynch works. I'm a big fan of Twin Peaks, and therefore I love everything about the character of the Log Lady, and she means so much to me in that respect. So I might be coming at this from a considerable degree of bias, I admit. That being said, I must say also that this is, as I say, a work where I learned so much about her life as an artist, which is associated with those worlds, but there are also other aspects of her life and career that are indeed things that I didn't know, and things that are part of the cinema world, the movie industry, but also they aren't Twin Peaks. She did a lot of other things, theater and cinematography work that was that had some associations, but they were their own different, unique things, and they were just as brilliant, just as reflective of who Catherine Coulson was and is as an artist. So you will learn so much through, again, the associations that she has with the world of Twin Peaks, but also who she was as a person and individual. And it is very emotional, very moving, and definitely worth the watch.
One of my dearest, closest friends is Catherine Coulson, for sure.
Hi, this is Catherine Coulson, Coulson. I'm on hospice. I probably don't have a whole lot longer.
In 1990, Catherine Coulson became an international cult icon as the Log Lady in the groundbreaking television series Twin Peaks.
2014, the big news, Mark Frost and David Lynch were going to return.
Catherine was hiding the fact that she was so sick.
It was stage 4.
Hospice said, "What's your heart's desire?" She said she wanted to finish her work on Twin Peaks.
We were up to that point where she was supposed to be working and coming up to work.
The producer was trying to organize a medical plane to bring her up.
She was going to fly to Washington. It could have killed her.
How could David put Catherine, who's dying, in a position as an actor portraying this woman
It's time.
who was dying?
The show must go on. It's life. Life goes on. The story has to be told, no matter what. Tell the story.
I Know Catherine, the Log Lady.
We'll all see each other again.
At the moment, as of the time of this video, you can watch this film, I Know Catherine the Log Lady. You can watch it in streaming capacity, and it is available at the website, which is called iknowcatherine.com. Now, if you go to that site, iknowcatherine.com, that'll take you to some streaming options, and it is available for paid streaming option capabilities. So I strongly encourage you to go to that website, iknowcatherine.com, and then see if you can watch it on streaming. Again, it is for a fee, but again, it is so worth it. So I strongly encourage you to check that out. And again, I should say up front that I don't get any commission or anything from that in terms of any time someone purchases a streaming. I don't get anything like that right now. So I don't say this in terms of my own self-promotion, but I am saying it because as a fan of her work, for example, in Twin Peaks, I grew to really admire Catherine Coulson, who she was as a person, as an artist, by watching this film, and it just gave me so much insight and just gave me so much ability to appreciate what she did for all of us even more. So if you loved her as the Log Lady, you've got to go see this film. So yes, so I'm saying it in that way. So if you want to support the filmmakers, you want to support Richard Green and the artists that he was working with, the crew of behind I Know Catherine the Log Lady, then I strongly encourage you to go to that website, iknowcatherine.com, and you can find the streaming options available. Also, I think the website does indicate places where it might be shown in theaters. So I don't know how updated that schedule is right now, but I know it has been touring at various places around the world, in fact. So if you happen upon a schedule at that website, and maybe it's showing at your local theater, that's also a great possibility, my dear friend. So please check it out as well if by chance it comes to a theater near you. There's also a YouTube channel focused exclusively to I Know Catherine the Log Lady. So I'll put that link in the description box so you can check that out. There's trailers, there's clips there. So please check that out as well. The links will be down below in the description box. Now I'd like to show you the interview that I had with Mr. Richard Green, where he and I speak about his 2025 work, the great work, which I strongly recommend to you, my dear friends. Go out and watch it right now. I Know Catherine the Log Lady. So here's my conversation with Mr. Richard Green. Thank you and congratulations to you and your team for creating this very moving portrait. How long has it been since it's gotten a release and since it's been shown to audiences? How long has it been now?
We did a sneak peek in the beginning of the year, and then because David's passing, all of a sudden there was an incredible amount of interest. So I think we're now at over 100 screens around the country and in a couple of different countries around the world. We did our digital release, the final digital release in August. I think at the end of August, beginning of September. I can't remember. I know it was Women's Equality Day when women got the vote. We thought that was appropriate for Catherine.
Catherine was my number one right-hand man. With me, solid. The one that was really helping the most on Eraserhead.
to facilitate people's lives. She really had a huge need to do that. So often you hear in a relationship that the man is the talented one and the woman could have been creative too, but just ended up being the woman behind the man. Catherine wasn't like that. She was always moving her own dream ahead too. She didn't sacrifice her own creative spirit.
You know, you make me think of even Eraserhead, her work on Eraserhead. She was, as you know, David's right-hand man, according to him, on Eraserhead, and really helped him the most, and was there. She was working at AFI. She got a job working in the administration of the American Film Institute. I've heard that she's largely responsible for it running so well those first 5 or 6 years. Another one of our executive producers, Donna Dubain, who's also in the film, went to work also for Catherine at AFI and eventually took over a lot of Catherine's administrative roles. And I think that sense of the importance of finishing things, of exploring them deeply. I mean, Eraserhead took 6 years to make and by 7 years to get out to the public. And Catherine was largely responsible for it being able to last that long, for raising money, keep going, but also keeping David at AFI and working. I mean, he was doing waitress jobs to feed them, and then they would get film stock ends. But it's the show must go on. Is, you know, why did they spend that time? Why did we spend 8 years editing this, 7 years, I guess, putting this film together? It's, you get something going that you feel so strongly about. And you know, Dave, I've heard David talk about this on video recently. It's really not about the money, and it's not about the pressure to complete or anything else. If you get your teeth really into the project demands of you a certain amount of time, commitment, effort, energy, even when you don't want to, or you're running out of money, or you're tired, or, you know, good enough isn't when you really get your teeth in a project, and it's the project that demands it. And, you know, the analogy or the I guess the similarity between life and the work, the art, life demands it too. You got to be there. You got to be present. And I think it's the work in this case, certainly that drove me. So the show must go on is more than just we've made a commitment and there's an audience. It's really, you have started this process of expressing this thing and making this statement, and I guess all of us just feel like you've got to get it finished.
What was the buildup and the background behind you wanting to approach this project to begin with? What was the inspiration or that spark that made you decide you wanted to take this on?
I studied film at Cal Arts initially, later for a short time at NYU. And at Cal Arts, Alexander McKendrick was the dean of the film school. Sandy McKendrick, he did some wonderful Ealing comedies like The Man in the White Suit, but he also did Sweet Smell of Success here for Burt Lancaster with Tony Curtis. Incredible picture. And he was an incredible teacher, passionate artist. And I asked him about improvisation, and because I was so much into the Cassavetes films at the time when I was at school. And, you know, his whole attitude was, yes, improvisation is the most important thing in the world, but you have to know the scales. You have to know what's possible. You have to explore it all. Then you've got all these different things, these different keys to operate in, these different notes and different combinations of shots and ideas. He quoted to me early on in my Cal Arts career, Picasso. And he said, Picasso said, first you find and then you look. You don't look for the next passionate project. You find it, and then you look into it. With Catherine, you know, there's always a lot of motivations of what gets someone started into something, right? I got a phone call the day Catherine died, which was literally just 10 years ago, and from Donna Dubain telling me that everybody who was at the house had signed a $6 million penalty NDA. If they spoke about what happened that day of the shoot, they would be liable for $6 million. Most of the people in that house will never earn half of that in their lifetimes, but that was what the NDA said. And at that moment, when Donna told me that Catherine died a few days after playing her role as the log lady, and the log lady was dying of cancer, which is what Catherine died of 2 or 3 days later. It turned out to be actually 4 days, but I heard it as 2, right? What? I just thought, that just got right under my skin. I just thought that was an extraordinary story. Why did it matter? How did they do it? I had also done, I Don't Know Jack, as the executive producer on that. It came out of my studio. Wonderful director Chris Levins did a fabulous job with Jack Nance's documentary. It's the unsolved life and homicide of Eraserhead star Jack Nance, because he's an unsolved homicide to this day. And I think when I got the idea, I thought, oh, well, that'll be a great companion piece for I Don't Know Jack. Maybe we'll call it I Know Catherine the Log Lady. Yeah, I know Catherine. I don't know Jack. I know Cat. Thought this was very clever of me. And so I started, the idea just got in. You know, I read a book, this is over 20 years ago, when we were still making 7 Year Zigzag, which was my first documentary as a director, my first feature as a director. I'm not sure it's a documentary. We've never been able to tell. You should see it. But I read this book called The Virus of the Mind. And The Virus of the Mind, it was the first time I heard the word meme, M-E-M-E, which now we refer to as little visual things that have an idea on them that you pass around. But this book's idea was that a meme is like a virus. It's an idea, and it goes into your head. You hear the idea, and you either reject it immediately, and then you kind of put it aside because you have other ideas that are stronger for you, or it sort of starts to sit. And as it sits, it, like a virus, it replicates, and eventually you got to tell somebody else this idea. So the ideas pass around virally, right? This was the idea of a meme. And it can also, you know, just germinate within you. Once I had that idea that this would make a wonderful film, what a great, interesting story, it just kept growing. And as I did more research, as I got the rights to the plays that Catherine did at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, as I started interviewing people, as I met Jenny Sullivan, who became our producer, who was one of Catherine's closest friends. And I knew a lot of the people that had been in Catherine's theater company, because there's a section of the film where we talk about the circus, this revolutionary, fabulous theater in San Francisco. When it broke up, everybody went to different places. They went to McCabe and Mrs. Miller, which was an Altman film, and different opportunities. Catherine and Jack, her husband at the time, the guy who played Eraserhead, Jack Nance, they came down to LA and went to AFI. But most of those same people ended up in the theater company that I started with a couple of other people when I arrived in San Francisco a year and a half later. And that sense of inevitability and family and the growth of these ideas, that all hit me at once when I got this idea to do I Know Catherine, the Log Lady. At one point, I must tell you, I wanted to change the name. I thought, you know, it's too long. And so I ran it by David through his assistant, Michael Burrell. And David said, no. He didn't forbid me. I mean, it wasn't that relationship, but he really wanted the name. He liked I Know Catherine the Log Lady. And, you know, there's a deference, I think, that I paid all throughout this project to David, not just because he was so close to Catherine, and not just because he's a famous director, but because I just trust in him intrinsically, artistically. I had a great experience working with him as an actor in Mulholland Drive, and there was a mutual trust between us on that set that was extraordinary for me, that I think we were able to find again between us in the interview that we did with him, which was like 20 years later from Mulholland Drive.
For you, the director of I Know Catherine the Log Lady, who is Catherine Coulson, and what does she mean to you?
And I met Catherine when I was 20. I had started this theater company in San Francisco. We had gotten very successful with lots of different kinds of shows. We were prominently featured in all of the sort of interactive Renaissance Dickens fairs that are happening up there. We got together with the Magic Theater, the Berkeley Rep, and the California State Historical Society, and the people who did the Renaissance Fairs, Theme Events Limited, and did a wonderful, one-of-a-kind, just lasted, I think, 6 or 12 weeks, at the Hyde Street Pier, which is right in front of Ghirardelli Square in the Cannery, and it has these wonderful ships, including the C.A. Thayer, which is, I think, got a 128-foot mast on it, this old clipper ship. and we did an environmental theater there. And I met Jack there. He came up for a weekend and played with us in that theater, on that stage at the Hyde Street Pier. But I met Catherine when I came down to Los Angeles. I was on my way. In those days, it was 1973. I was 20 years old, and my career was doing really well. I was doing improvised verse in the streets of San Francisco when the theater company sort of found me, and we pulled that theater company together. But I kept doing the improvised verse, and I raised a bunch of money, and I was going to do the sort of the dream trip of every hippie. Every young hippie was to travel and go to Europe and get lost for a year, maybe end up in India or Greece or wherever you ended up. You just go on the road for a year and see what happens. And I was determined to do that. And I left San Francisco. I left my dog with the theater company, and I came down to LA. And through a series of crazy things, I ended up going to the track with my dad, and I ended up doubling the money I had saved to get me to Europe. So I had, instead of $600, now I had $1,200. I won a couple of bets. It was crazy. And because I ended up staying in LA for an extra week, I bought a plane ticket to get back and forth from Europe with an open-ended ticket. And I ended up on the opening bill of the Mayfair Music Hall, as did another actor from our company who's also in Eraserhead, Frankie Phipps Wilson. And so I stayed in LA for this period of time. I think it was 2 3-week contracts. It might have been 2 6-week contracts. It was over 50 years ago, so I don't remember. But they were making Eraserhead. Frankie and Catherine were good friends. I ended up going up to this apartment in Beechwood Canyon that you actually see in the movie. It's actually in the film, the place that they were all living at the time. We ended up renting it to shoot there, and one of our composers, Jake Blue Note, now lives there. And that's when I met Catherine. That's when I met David. And for me, Catherine was kind of in the background in those days, because Jack was hysterically funny, just a really funny guy. David was just unusual and interesting, with 3 ties on. I thought he was like, Jimmy Stewart, kind of a snap brim, old 30s hat, talked like Jimmy Stewart in a little bit. And we just hung out. That's how I met Catherine, and she was sort of in the background. She was always taking care of everybody. And over the years, I always felt like we were cousins in a big theatrical family. The family was stretched out, people in New York and in Dallas and Kansas City and Los Angeles, of course, and San Francisco. And we would all get together for shows, or we would get together if somebody got sick or got a wedding or something. So I would see Catherine over the years, and she was always instrumental in helping me hook up with David. When we wanted to do I Don't Know Jack, it was Catherine we went to talk to David about whether he would do it, and he did. He gave us a great interview for that. When David wanted to find me from Mulholland Drive, he couldn't remember my name, but he called Catherine in Oregon, and Catherine in Oregon called my office in Los Angeles to talk to Donna. The next day I came in and I said, well, was Catherine calling about the Jack documentary? And no, they're looking for this guy who's really good with words and used to be a magician. And I had told David about being a magician at Jack Nance's memorial 2 years before. That's the last time I'd seen him. So Catherine was kind of instrumental in putting me together with other people. She came to my house and studio to do her interview for I Don't Know Jack, and brought Zoe, who was, I think, 12 years old or less at the time. I went up to the 2003, I think it was, Twin Peaks Fan Festival up in North Bend and Snoqualmie, and Catherine was there, and I remember we spent some time together there. But it was always kind of me and Catherine in a room with a lot of other people. We didn't spend a lot of time talking. Almost everybody that is in the film felt like Catherine was their best friend, had that kind of deep emotional connection to her. I didn't. And I think that's why I ended up being able to make the film that I made. I wasn't wrapped up with my perception of Catherine. I was really interested in everybody else's. And as you said at the beginning of this question, the idea that she was in all these different areas. There were 4 really distinctive areas of her life. On camera as the log lady. We all know her, 25 years carrying that log around to all over the world to events that promoted Twin Peaks and kept it alive. But that was on camera. Behind the camera, as you know, she was, Fred Elmes taught her to be first assistant, and she pulled focus for Opening Night with Cassavetes, Killing of a Chinese Bookie. She pulled focus on Jim Jarmusch films. She pulled focus on Star Trek Wrath of Khan, first woman who did really a big production like that as the first AC, who's so responsible for making sure what goes into the camera works, right? You really need the AC to be of high competence, and Catherine was certainly that.
Herb Cardwell, who shot the first few months, and then Fred Elmes, who shot the rest of the film.
The Eraserhead crew there was about 5 of us, that made pretty much the whole film. So it was a very small group, and Catherine, was there front and center helping me with the camera. I got this job with John Cassavetes with Killing of a Chinese Bookie. Was able to bring some of my crew members on, Catherine as well, and we told David, we actually have some real paying work here, and we have to stop for a little bit, not too long, and shoot this other feature, and then we'll come back. You couldn't help but interact with Catherine.
So that was, on camera, behind the camera, on stage. She did 22 seasons of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, but plays all over the country as a theater actress. And then in the community, right, as a community leader in Ashland, where she lived for 22 years, she was the welcoming committee. When a new actor came to Ashland, she would meet them with, places they could go if they had kids, things they could do with their kids. She had papers and maps and business cards of the place to get the massage. She was just this incredibly welcoming person. And then she married a rabbi. And in the, at least in the Reformed Jewish community, as I understand it, the rabbi's wife, like a preacher's wife, is extraordinarily important in the social aspect of visiting the sick and what's happening, who's getting married, who needs help in the community, who makes, she would bake challah bread and bring it to these events. So, those 4 aspects of her life, the longest part of the process was understanding who she was, getting those 4 aspects documented, because nobody really knew the whole story of Catherine. Some people, like Jenny, our producer, very close to her, knew most of it, but not everything. There were some real surprises for Jenny as well. So for me, she was a big cousin in a big theatrical family who I got to know while doing this film. And, just knowing her and knowing the people that, that are so important in her life, my life changed over the last 7 years. Just my perspective of how we live and what's important and what art means. All of these things have, expanded and deepened. Every interview we did was over an hour, and there's 65 interviews or more. And so there's a lot of material, like the David Lynch interview. It's just wide-ranging things that we covered. And it was partly just my technique, right? For me to talk to Kyle MacLachlan about Catherine, I felt like I needed to understand who Kyle was, what his attitude about acting was, how he got to that place in his life. Then I could understand how to talk to him about Catherine and get all that rich stuff that we were able to get. So each of the interviews really covers sort of the life and the influences of the person being interviewed, so that I was then ready to move into the parts about Catherine and the parts about life and work and, the show must go on. There was a pretty common question we asked everybody, and some of the responses are just, they're extraordinary.
How would you describe your interview technique? You said you were trying to get to know the person and then have them talk about maybe something within maybe their comfort zone, and then you could talk about Catherine and some details about that. But maybe could you unpack that a little bit more? I mean, what would you say would be some of your interview techniques? Did it work with certain people? Were there other times where you had to find a different approach to this sort of thing? How would you describe that for people who are watching your work with the interviews? And they're great, by the way.
Well, thank you. Kind of almost not a digression, but I think the first interviews I ever conducted when I was in high school, the first 2 years I just didn't pay attention. I just never went. I smoked a lot of pot and played a lot of music. And then I decided that I wanted to be a professional actor and filmmaker. And I did a little research, and it seemed like the only good school for acting at that time was Yale. So I knew I had to get good grades to get into Yale. So the third year of high school, I was very motivated. I arrived at school. I was going to get A's to balance this out so I could go to Yale. And I walked into a classroom with a guy named Emmanuel Lombard, who had convinced the school that there were a bunch of people, I guess I was included, who were very intelligent, high IQ people who weren't paying attention. This is like the late 60s, 68, 69, 70. And he used just experimental techniques. He gave me a book called Summerhill about experimental education. And his whole thing was that we were going to talk during class and keep a journal. That was going to be the whole English class for the year. Just talk every day, keep a journal. What did you find yesterday that you want to talk about? So after a couple of weeks, he told me that he loved talking to me because we were just right at it from day one. And I was the only one talking. And I was like, oh my God, I've done it again. I've dominated a conversation. My ego gets out of, whatever. I just keep talking, right? So he said, no, you're the only one talking in any of the 3 classes. And he said, if we don't get everybody else talking, they're going to cancel these classes. And I was having a ball. So the next day I came into class and I saw this cat just 2 weeks ago, not the teacher, but there's a wonderful photographer named Jeff Dunas. And we went to high school together. He now runs the Palm Springs Photo Festival, just a world-renowned photographer. One of my favorite of his works is a book on blues. He traveled around the South and shot blues players in their natural environment of some of these little funky juke joints and stuff. Just a really great book. And he's a great guy. He was shooting for Playboy and We magazine at 17. If us 17-year-old boys were very much admired this guy. Anyway, he was in the class and I just started peppering him with questions. And I started developing abilities to get people to talk and understand what the difference was between asking a question that gets a closed answer or asking a question that gets an open answer, right? Years later, I developed a company. My father had hit his 70s, had an extraordinary life, but was depressed and he couldn't see the life that he had from my perspective, right? I thought he'd had a great life. So I convinced this psychologist, a Jungian psychologist by the name of Dr. Richard Friedman, to do some sessions with my dad, and we would videotape them. And it developed into this idea of the video biography company. There was a very popular show on at the time called Biography. It was on the A&E channel, and they would do biographies of famous people. And we thought, why not use those techniques to do biographies of everybody's family members? And so we developed over the course of a year. There was a woman named Ellie Kahn, who was like one of the prominent oral historians in Los Angeles. She engaged with us, had producer Sheldon Perry was backing the project. And we developed this modular format that you could literally have somebody fill out a questionnaire and then tell them their life and get them to react to it. So instead of like saying, what was your father's name? We know your father's name, right? So I would say that, your father was named so-and-so and so-and-so. What did you call him? And it was because you could put the father's face and his name and the birth date on the screen, right? But it was the person going, oh, I called him Pop, or whatever they called him, right? That would make it personal. And we would basically tell somebody their story, elicit these responses from them, all with the goal of having the arc of their story be told. And at the very end, we would ask them to look into the camera and talk to future generations. And that was always moving and effective. That was an interesting project that almost took off, got very close. So when I started doing the interviews for I Know Catherine, I knew what I felt already was important about the story. I knew that this thing at the end of her, bringing all of her friends coming together to allow her to do something so important to her was the central thrust of the film. But as I found out more about her life, I started seeing all these contacts and connections. So each interview was really scoped out to elicit responses to things that I'd already felt were important in the film. So as an editor and as a filmmaker, I'm not just asking random questions, just what happened today and, get it down. It's really about finding material that amplifies these ideas and the things that I knew had happened and discovering stuff that I didn't know before. So each question, I would look into the background of the person a little bit, get their influences when they started thinking about art. You start to understand how they think about art, how they think about things. And I guess there's a conscious process here, but it's also just, it's like if you make love to a new person, or you don't know what's going to happen, what moves you're going to make, but you know what the beginning and the middle and the end kind of going to look like. And then you stay as present as you can, and you respond to them. If you a squeeze or a tickle here, you respond to it. And I guess that's a pretty bad analogy for an interview, but but the idea is that you're present. That what's more important than knowing the questions, what's more important than trying to get an answer, is to be present with the person, listening to what they're saying, letting them know that what they're saying and where they're going is of interest, is fascinating, and it's, you don't act, you just be, right? There are certain things you can do as an editor. I know I don't want me going because it's going to get in the way of the editing of the line. So a lot of it is just physicalization, so that the person really feels heard, and it's because you're really hearing them. And that formulates the way you ask a question. You're playing off of something else that they said, or that somebody else said something, and it'd be interesting to hear his perspective on that. You just go with it. You stay present. Refer back to the structure, because there's certain things you just need to ask and you want to ask. But it's really setting up a connection with the person, so that they're not just giving you the rote answer. They're with you. They're in it. They're committed to having you understand the point they're making right now in this moment.
What were some of the surprising moments? Do you have any examples in I Know Catherine the Log Lady, for instance? What were some of the most surprising or memorable moments that you had with the interviewees that you had?
There's a wonderful young actor named Pedro Correa, who lived at our studio for a couple of years. When he was like 17, he convinced his folks to let him come to Hollywood and study acting. And he ended up, because of a family connection through Logan Heftel, who was working with us, also one of our producers, living with us. And Pedro was just just really fascinating kid. He's done My Dead Dad is a feature that he wrote and stars in. He's got a great career, up and coming career. And I'm trying to remember what the connection is to Pedro. Pardon me, I'm just blanked out completely here. Oh yeah. So, I'm sorry. So our budget was very, very tight on this film. We raised almost $300,000 on Kickstarter, but that's kind of an expensive thing to do. There are fees involved, but also you need a lot of staff to really create the rewards and then fulfill the rewards. And so it was very expensive money, and it was a third, what turned out to be a little less than a third of our budget. Over the last 7 years, we've put in a lot of time and a lot of money. But one of the things that we would do is to save money, like Pedro Correa was also a good DP, and he had a camera. So I asked him to fly up with me to the Bay Area. We first interviewed Michael Horse. He was living at that time right outside of Berkeley. He had a wonderful little house. It was great. Animals around, chickens and stuff, and his dogs. And then we drove up to Napa to interview Charlotte Stewart, and then flew back home. I did this also in New York. One time I flew in to interview Fred Elmes and Dana Ashbrook and flew back that night. I did it in Florida, interviewing Mark Frost. I don't like flying much anymore. I got to tell you, it's a lot of work. But Pedro and I go up there, and Charlotte, who's just a lovely woman, just a lovely person, right? And with some great stories. She takes us up to a winery, and we shoot at this winery. And at one point, I had been pursuing this idea of rock and roll being a part of this film. There's a mini-series version of the film that talks about a movie that Jenny Sullivan directed that Catherine produced while at the AFI, American Film Institute, called Access All Areas, that tells the story of Jenny Sullivan, who's our producer and is in the movie. She was married to Jim Messina of Loggins and Messina fame. And her best friend from high school, or not from high school, but through her sister, I guess, is a woman named Eva Ein, who I knew in high school. And Eva Ein ended up marrying Kenny Loggins. So we had Loggins and Messina married to these two girlfriends for a long time. And just, fascinating, wonderful, wonderful people, right? So I thought rock and roll. They produced a movie called Access All Areas about backstage wives and rock and roll. It's a very interesting movie. It's got a bunch of really interesting people in it, including Harry Nilsson is in it as well. And that you can see that if we ever release the miniseries. So I go up and I'm looking for a musical connection, and somehow or other, Charlotte Stewart tells me this story about how in the late 60s, she had a clothing store right across the street from where the offices for the Woodstock people and David Geffen's, I guess, office was there. And, she would see Joni Mitchell and Crosby, Stills and Nash and Jackson Browne. All those people were hanging out, and they would come into her store. And one day she looked up and there's Jim Morrison. And she turns to me and then says, now, I was never his girlfriend, but when he came back from Florida, she says, and I'll send you the clip, she says, we became friends, and then we became drinking buddies, and then we became drinking buddies with benefits. And the day after he was arrested in Florida for indecent exposure, Jim Morrison, he came back to Los Angeles, went to see Charlotte, and said, let's get out of here, let's take a drive. And she grabbed her Super 8 camera, and Jim Morrison and Charlotte Stewart got in the car, and he drove up the West Coast to San Simeon. And we have footage of Jim Morrison driving a car and standing and playing with his hair in front of at a burger joint and going in places in San Simeon, this incredible Xanadu-like place that William Randolph Hearst built up in the Northern California area. So that surprised me that Charlotte Stewart, Miss Beadle from Little House on the Prairie, Betty Briggs, I think it is, Colonel Bobby Briggs is his mom in Twin Peaks, and also she plays, the wife in Eraserhead. So that shocked me. That was the first kind of real shock I had. Another shock that was just sort of surprised me was twofold, actually. One, I asked David at some point in the interview, and he was the first interview I conducted for this film. We had done a couple more with Bill Haugsy, who's in the film. I'm going to talk about him in a second. He had conducted. He wanted to direct it. I didn't feel that he would have the larger perspective, and he eventually agreed with that and handed it back over to me. But my first interview was with David, and at one point I said to David, I said, do you ever dream about Catherine? And he said, oh, no, Richard, I don't remember my dreams. And I'm like, what? David Lynch, who I thought, and I thought everybody else thought, he dreams it and then shoots it. He doesn't remember people in his dreams, and he doesn't remember his dreams. So I asked him if he'd ever seen Catherine in theater, and he told me that he never did. He tried to avoid it, and I was really surprised. And he answers on screen, you'll see it in the movie, he says that sometimes you develop a relationship with an actor, you create something with them, and you really don't want to see them in something else, do something else with somebody else. You want to keep it for yourself. And I honestly felt like he was also talking to me a little bit, because I fully expected after Mulholland Drive, I'd be in everything he ever did. And I couldn't get an audition for the life of me in Inland Empire. They didn't see me. So I think the magician was, we did that, and that was me and David. And that's it, right? Now we got to do, this interview. And the third shock to me, which I know you want to talk about later as well, is when Bill Haugsy, this is the gentleman who had wanted to direct it, did a couple of the interviews, and then felt that he couldn't find the film and handed it back to me. When he revealed the stories that he did, I had no idea where he was going. I didn't know that Catherine had lost a child. I didn't know that it was with him. I didn't know anything. And so I was just, I was like, oh my God, I'm hearing this, and I'm watching this man go through this cathartic, emotional opening of himself, kind of a mea culpa in some ways. In that room that day, you'll see Bill Haugsy looks to both sides of the camera at some point. I was on one side and Jenny was on the other side. And I think that he was speaking to not only Jenny, but maybe to all of Catherine's friends, who condemned his behavior his behavior toward Catherine in the prime of their lives. And I think it was very important for him to open that up. And it takes the film to a place that it just is very intimate, and I think brave of him, to be honest with you, to speak that honestly about these hard things. And they resonated so much in the movie. And again, talking about the interview techniques, things come up and you go, oh my God, this is so related to that thing. A new question, a new line of questioning will open up. If you're right there with the person and they feel that their story is important to you, they'll tell it, and without preconception, without, oh, I used to tell it this way. They'll talk to you. And that's, powerful.
It was very, very painful for both of us, but I'm going to need to, I think maybe the reason I wanted to stay away from this is because I was not a gentleman. I was not a nice person.
She had to have these tumors removed, and with the tumors being removed, it was a hysterectomy.
She recovered, and we started rehearsing again. And I couldn't bear to look at her. I couldn't read her face. I think it was selfishness. It was probably my childishness. I needed her to be strong and nurturing, and she wasn't, and I don't know.
Now that you bring it up, I do want to mention the moments with Bill Haugsy. I do want to touch upon it. It is incredibly powerful, what he relates. And it's not just particular moments. He recounts basically his entire life with Catherine when they first met, how they fell in love, and there were good times and there were very, very sad times as well.
Yes.
And he is very open about this. I have a kind of two-part question on this, but let me ask the first part first, and I'll explain the second part, which might explain why the first part is the way I'm asking it. So it might seem a bit untoward, just asking this first part, but there's a reason why. So just wait until the second part. So if it seems untoward, I apologize. But from a filmmaking perspective, was there a point where you felt that you might risk going too personal? You handle it, I think, very gracefully and with a very graceful and sensitive manner. But were there moments when you were in the editing room, when you were still fashioning the final form of the film together? Were there moments where you're thinking, how personal do you think I can go before I cross some kind of line? Was there something in that thinking when you're fashioning it together? And that's the first part. And let me throw it back to you before I get to the second part, which is why I phrased it in that way.
Great question. There were things that were said to me by Bill and by other people as well that I thought were too personal to include. So there's no formula to making any kind of movie, a decent movie. I mean, I'm a big fan of Law and Order, right? There's like 10,000 episodes, and they're all the same. They all present a problem that the cops stumble into, and then the cops then have to figure out who did what, and then we're not sure about it, and we go to the trial, and the trial tells us, and the story's over, and then the next episode. So you can watch any order of Law and Order. There is a formula to them. That doesn't mean they're not great and wonderful and distracting and easy on the brain, which is why I've watched so many. But when you come to telling stories, there are endless possibilities and no formula to say, oh, well, this is too much of that, or this is too much of that, or you need a little bit of this. So every filmmaker, especially those of us who have the freedom of poverty sometimes, that we have a little bit of money and we get to do it the way we want because nobody's telling us, or David, who earned his freedom, hard earned, and David Lynch to me is maybe the greatest artist of the last 100 years. I could argue that point pretty well. but he didn't make great deals of money. I mean, I know his 3 homes in the Hollywood Hills, all of which are beautiful, and they're right next to each other. They're only going for $15 million. I mean, I know that's a lot of money to most of us. It's a lot of money to me, for sure. But when you think of the kind of money that big directors, famous people, half as famous as David, will make a lot more money. But David, he earned the freedom to make things the way he wanted. Inland Empire is just what he wanted. And his reputation and his demand to do things the way he wanted to without compromise is what got him whatever amount of money Showtime gave him for season 3. I'm sure it was a lot of money, and it's an 18 episode movie is what it is. And it's just the way David wanted it to be. And I believe, David Lynch is a singular artist in some ways because he knew what he wanted. That doesn't mean that he wasn't able to change. On the set of Mulholland Drive, I had completely rewritten that scene in 3 different languages, which is what he'd asked me to do. But I had to choose when it was English and Spanish and French, and which translation of which line went where. And I arrived on the set that first morning, and I just said, here's English, Spanish, and French. It's now the 7-page script is 23 pages. Here is my compendium of it all. It's 10 pages. You want to see it? That's what he wanted to see, and that's what we shot. He was totally open to new things coming his way, to working with what was really there in front of him. But he knew what he wanted, and he was very specific about it. So I guess I had a really good team of people that were there for the most of the shaping of the primary narrative. Jane Albachet, who is our executive producer, would sit with me most days that I was editing. I'd just have her zoom in. She'd watch me edit, and I could ask her to go, "Oh, can you find this image for me?" Or can you, and then I would also be able to say, "What do you think of that?" And there are certainly scenes in this film that we cut way back because people sometimes revealed parts of themselves that were unpleasant, and maybe went a little farther than I thought the audience would be willing to go with them. But again, the reason I went into this whole thing about David was you have to trust your gut. You have to know in your heart what you want to see. Ultimately, I made the film that I want to watch, and I like watching it with lots of changes. The great thing about showing it at over 100 screens were to be able to refine it and keep refining it right up until our Academy run, which we did in, I guess, May. I was able to pull, 10 minutes out of the film, not bad 10 minutes, but just 10 minutes we didn't need. Maybe some moment that was a little confusing. You make it for yourself. The logic has to be internal to you, but not everything you think works for everybody. So the feedback from people is important. And there were a couple of scenes, a couple of places where we went a lot farther in certain issues. One of the issues, I'll give you an example that was very sensitive, that we spent a fair amount of time on, that we kind of just left alone in the film ultimately, is the issue of Catherine getting cancer. She got sick after the betrayal of her 3rd husband. And there were quotes from some people in the film, in the interviews, that were saying, oh, her anger gave her the cancer. And there were people in our, not just in our team, but, that were supportive of the film, that are in the film, that were watching things as we're moving along, who felt that this was absolutely wrong. Happy people get cancer too. So they didn't want us to go there. And there are 2 sides to that coin. I did a bunch of research about the medical research, about attitudes and the way we treat our bodies and getting sick, and the opposite side of that as well. So we decided that was a little bit too controversial, that we didn't want to say Catherine got sick because of this. But I think that the film does say, at least subtly, I hope this comes across, that Catherine was so devastated by the loss of her final marriage, and the sort of difficulty of dealing with that in a small town as the rabbi's wife. He was the rabbi in this important community, and also one of the primary actresses in this world famous Shakespeare company, right? Theater company. It wasn't private. And Catherine went pretty far down that rabbit hole. And, arguments can be made that it was her her reaction to all of that made her vulnerable and got her sick. I don't have an opinion one way or the other, but we explored it. And that the controversy of that, of how much do you include in that? We allude to it, but we leave it for people to see. But I do believe that this wonderful person, this character, this human, Catherine Coulson, who was so interested in helping the people around her, who was so present. I think that this betrayal in her third marriage, or her second marriage, but her third big love of her life, I think it shrunk her. I think it took her to a very dark place, who she was, and that getting sick and having that challenge of, oh my God, I'm sick, I got to stay here, I got a daughter who really needs to be prepared for this, and I have commitments and people and things, I think that brought her back. I think that she had gone pretty far down the rabbit hole and maybe was very dark, in a dark place, and that the challenge of trying to beat the cancer and stay alive long enough for her daughter and for the show and all the reasons that she was making that almost heroic effort. I think that brought her back to who she was as Catherine. That's just my theory. I don't know if the movie supports it or if it's true, but it felt like that to me.
No, thank you very much for that, Richard. I appreciate that. I say it was a two-part question, and that was the first part. And I think it and I apologize if it sounded in any way maybe untoward.
Not at all.
But the reason why I wanted to bring, or one of the other reasons why I wanted to bring it up too, was it seems to me, and please correct me if you think my interpretation is off, but it seems to me that one of the great ways that you've hooked a kind of structure to this work. It has many structures, I think, but one of the great structures that I think is being applied is there are ways in which we do see Catherine showing a lot of her personal stuff. Returning to Bill Haugsy for a second, there is also a moment where he describes about how years later after they had separated, and I think there was an attempt to have a reconciliation between the two, a personal reconciliation. And I think please correct me if I'm wrong, but according to your documentary on, I think it was, their mutual initiative, but Catherine invited him up to see a show up in Oregon. And to all accounts and her accounts, which you've captured so well in the work, it was a very intense show. It was an intense character that she was portraying on stage, because there's a lot of personal, it was a very intense personal drama that was being acted out on stage there. And I think Bill Haugsy mentioned that he had a seat in particular in the audience, and she could point him out where he was, something like that. And there was a moment in the show that she was performing on stage where he was an audience member, where her character was talking about, in very direct, dramatic terms, about the loss of a child.
She invited me up to see this play that had been written for her. I was desperate to have her back in my life. She knew where I was sitting because she had picked out the seat.
I was pregnant once. And I don't remember eating or longing for dirt or pickles and ice cream or anything exotic like that. I would have eaten broken glass to have that baby, but that was not meant to be. How do you make a mojito?
You lost your child.
Oh, now that is a phrase I am not fond of. Lost your child. It sounds like it was a handbag that you put down somewhere and forgot. I did not lose my child.
I am sorry.
That makes two of us. Old news. Boring news. Mojitos.
She knew where I was sitting.
I miscarried the next day. My son. Clumsy girl. Stupid girl.
Catherine.
His death changed things between us.
Next morning, we met at a little cafe there in in Ashland, you know, it was raining, and there was an awning in the rain. You could hear the rain, and she was ready to restore our friendship.
Very reflective of something that had happened to her in her own life. So it's almost like the divide between the public persona and the artist persona and the private is very, it's not there. It's one and the same. And so I feel like there is this almost thesis statement that's being said that in many ways Catherine was so open that anything that she was expressing in her art was just a conduit for who she was as a person. You know, the private and the public seem to be connected in that way.
That's an excellent perception, and I think it's very true. And I think it comes out in a couple of different places in the film, and just in general about how she approached her life, even to the extent of I mean, the film, you know, talks about her growing up at Disneyland. Her father was the head of PR when they opened the park, and eventually Walt Disney gave her father the Aunt Jemima Pancake House to run, and Catherine stocked it with all of her high school and college friends. But in those years, she also played characters, dress-up characters, Snow White, or other characters that would walk around the park and interact with families and children and stuff. And I think that experience, I think, informed not just Catherine's acting and her doing the same thing with the log for 25 years, going to events, you know, Comic-Cons and Twin Peaks festivals. There was a great one in UK for 10 years that she was a part of, much of. You know, standing next to a person in the public holding the log. She's Catherine, but she's Catherine channeling log lady who's channeling the log. I mean, the mix between art and reality, those things, you know, they blur. David was, you know, famous for making furniture where you're making art that is reality, right? That you're going to use. That lamp turns on and is going to allow you to read your book. I think that, you know, in December, Donna Dubane, our executive producer, one of my closest friends of my life, passed away. David passed away in January. I felt like we were close collaborators on a couple of projects, and I knew him for a long time. Never got invited to dinner, but we did the best work that I've ever done is directly related to David, both as the magician in Mulholland Drive as an actor, but also, you know, this movie wouldn't have happened without David. I wouldn't have tried it. It wouldn't be what it is without David. He's just amazing in the film. So those collaborative relationships are really, really important to me. But it's the commitment to, in February, I just wanted to add, David died in Donna in December, David in January, and Cab Covey, another founding member of our theater company, Theater Marvels, which grew out of the Circus Theater Company. He passed. And, you know, he was a great mentor to me. When I was 20, or I guess I was 18 when I first arrived in San Francisco, and we started the theater company 6 months later or something like that. And so I was 20 when I left. It was a couple of years that I was there. But Cab was one of the great influences on me, and they were all 28, 27. I was 19, right? 26, 27. So there's about a 7 or 8 year difference, which is big at in that age. You know, you're just coming out of your teens, right? For me. But Cab, you know, said to me that life is the greatest art. The art of living is the greatest art. And he was a prime example of that, just an accomplished painter and musician, actor and writer. And an example to me of the idea that we are storytellers. And, you know, we have different skill sets that we do. I write songs. There's a lot of my music in the film. The end credit sequence, a song called Some Believe, I wrote and asked Rebecca Del Rio to duet with me. And she's, you know, wonderful on this. It's the last recording that, you know, that I worked on I worked on with her was that song. We're storytellers, and it's just how many different sets of skills do you have? The artist is in the way you perceive things, and in your approach to making them happen. The skill sets and the taste and stuff, that's all the specifics. But it's the art. It's the It's the essence of who you are and how you see the world and what you need from the world and what you need to find from the art. You asked me about, when I got interested in this film and how and what caught me. I can only say the conscious things, but I think there's a lot of unconscious things that motivate us as well. What keeps somebody like me, who had a pretty good career in voiceover, I was working all the time, and I kind of let it dry up while I just got totally immersed in this project, although I kept writing songs. So it is the passion, it is the thing that we need, and that you can't really, I can't identify fully what I've gotten from this film and why it's important. I just know that my life has completely changed, how I look at life, even the fact that I meditate every day. After doing the interview with David, I was convinced that I would learn more about how David and Catherine interacted if I studied TM. Really glad that I took that opportunity.
Many things are brought up in the context of Twin Peaks. Of course, the scenes with the log lady in Twin Peaks: The Return, where the log lady says in her words, as performed by Catherine Coulson, "I'm dying." Could I get your take on that particular moment, which I think is also very revealing? I mean, they're very frank about, maybe is David Lynch just being a bit too harsh and he's going too far in terms of how he's directing her, especially given her medical state at the time.
I remember being a little concerned about her physical condition, whether she would be able to sit upright enough. She needed a lot of help to get in front of the camera.
When they brought her out in the wheelchair, and I think she had oxygen on, it was striking how sort of frail she appeared.
The camera is right now was a small end table, and on top of that, a laptop computer was sitting there and open. When the time was right, a Skype call was initiated, and there's David Lynch. As soon as David appeared on the screen, you could see her pulling these energy reserves that she had somewhere in her soul, in her body, into herself. And you could see her sitting up straight. I physically saw her get taller.
David was reading a line at a time to her. So he would read the line, and then she would say the line back. And I'm watching this process thinking, oh my gosh, how is she acting these lines so beautifully in the moment? And then occasionally she would get her words mixed up or not say it right, and David would say, no, Catherine, it's like this. And it did I think at first it surprised me a little bit at how strong he was towards her in a gentle, in a kind way, but very intentional and strong. And I'm thinking, gosh, she's sick, can't you see? Be really gentle with her.
I was actually getting a little angry and saying, how could this man put this woman who's dying in a position as an actor portraying this woman who was dying? So I thought, isn't that insensitive?
I was trying to treat her with kid gloves, but she was so professional in that moment, and she wanted him to be that director and treat her like she was alive and brilliant and in perfect health in that moment.
It was surreal.
They were working. He didn't pull any punches. I mean, the dialogue he was feeding her, he wasn't dialing anything back, and she wasn't dialing anything back. She was full on into it, even though some of the lines I think probably were a little close to home and maybe uncomfortable for some of us standing around shooting it. But the two of them were just in it 100%.
It was all extremely professional, yet at the same time very deeply personal.
Those of us who were there got to see the whole thing as one piece. It was stunningly beautiful.
Talking to her, then, and it's not part of the scene. I think we both knew it was the last time we were going to talk to each other. And I don't really remember, what was said, but it was just great that she was able to do that and that we were able to talk near the end there.
I've only worked with David as an actor once, and he was not harsh with me at all. Everybody that I've ever talked to that's worked under David as an actor feels pretty much the same way. He's just the best audience in the world. He's totally present and gets it. You know, I felt that way on the set of Mulholland Drive. I felt that way after I sent David the miniseries version of this, and I flew to Germany. I actually flew to Amsterdam and then went into Germany because I wanted to meet our art director who had been working with us for a few months. And I talked to David in a mall in Frankfurt, Germany, is where he caught me. And he had me crying for 20 minutes because he just got what I was doing so deeply, mentioning things that I'd forgotten that I had done. You know, things that you put in that's important to you. You work for hours, just get that one little thing right because you think it's going to color this element, and then you forget about it. 6 months later, 3 years later, somebody like David sees it and goes, "That was," and it just, I was flabbergasted. I was surprised, and we mentioned it a minute ago, when David gets off the phone and decides he's going to do TM, and he says, "Catherine, go and do this," right? The militarist telling the telling to do. It surprised me when he said that in the interview, because I see him as so soft and easygoing, but he was very direct with Catherine about that. And I think that was what they wanted. I mean, that's to me one of the most beautiful parts of the film, is the knowing and the understanding that they trusted each other so much they could be direct, and what might seem harsh or impatient or not understanding to somebody else, these two had no question about how much they loved each other, cared for each other, respected each other, and nor how much it meant for both of them to get these scenes done. Timmy Neer, who's a wonderful actress, and one of my favorite parts of the movie are just anything Timmy's in. She's just so much fun and bubbly and stuff. And people won't realize it because we couldn't find a way to sort of shove it into the movie. Timmy was, she worked with the National Theater of Deaf and then was hired by Sesame Street. So for years, when you saw someone signing on Sesame Street, it was Timmy Neer, who's in our film. And it was so close to Catherine. The directness is a matter of trust. And, I love that part of the film where they talk about, it seemed harsh, and maybe even uncomfortable to the people who were there because they knew Catherine was dying. And here she is saying lines, David's feeding her lines, and she's talking about dying, and she's dying. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. But it's real. And it's what we all do. I think one of the things I believe is of value to the film beyond Twin Peaks interest, or even the entertainment value of a story that's kind of like a ticking clock. Is it what's going to happen? Are we going to get there at the end? Is she going to make it? How are they going to do it if she does make it? All of that stuff is wonderful. But the thing that really moves me is the opportunity to look and talk about death in a realistic way. We run from it. We dress in black. It's the darkest, and people, they're so uncomfortable with the notion of it. And it's, people who are dying, shun other people because they're embarrassed that they're dying. And in fact, it's such an important part of our life. I'm a big fan of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, and not that I can interpret it well, but there is a part that talks about how you can't really appreciate life unless you embrace death, unless you understand that there's a limitation to it. And in our young years, it seems like we're never going to die. I mean, we're invincible and immortal, and it just doesn't seem possible. But when you start losing your family and your friends, you start to go, well, wait a minute, do I really want to waste my time having an argument with this person right now when there's so many other things I need to do? And you recognize the value, both the value of time, its limitations, and its infinity. I mean, on the other hand, we're here in this moment, Daisuke, you and I are sharing space and talking about things from the past that I made a movie, you watched it, I've watched it, we're talking about it, and but we're here now, and that now is all there is, right? It was now when we started, it'll be now when we finished, it'll always be now, and appreciating that now and living it, I think, with the courage of, okay, I'm going to die, but until then, let's have a good time. Let's do something. Let's make something happen. Let's use our time. Let's value it. Let's appreciate it. You and I have spent time, spending time here. We may never speak again. I hope we do. I'd like to meet you. I'd like to buy you a meal. This is a wonderful conversation, and I'd like to continue it. But we may never, and we may. But it's appreciating now in the moment. That's what I get from the film. That and that death is a part of life. It is scary, and anything you do. I mean, getting on a stage with a play for the first time or the 30th time is scary. But that doesn't mean that we should turn away from it or ritualize it so much that we don't feel it. It's sad to lose someone, and it's hard. But it's less sad if you've said everything you need to say. And if you've experienced everything you can with that person and are open to it. If you turn away from death, I think we lose a lot of the experience of the richness of life. Grace Zabriskie, who is an extraordinarily interesting woman, we have a little piece we're going to make just about her taking us around her house and showing us the art and talking about Catherine coming to her house. I guess this is back in season 1 or 2. Coming to Grace's house and being comfortable in a house that had a lot of original artwork in it, whether it's cabinetry or sculptures or these boxes that Grace makes. And she talks about the depth of their relationship, and you could see the respect they held one another in, and why. And that's a wonderful part of the film for me, because it means I have this theory, and it's not borne out. I should talk to David's producers, Sabrina Sutherland, about this one day. I don't know what she'll think, but I have a theory that I asked David in the beginning of the interview. I said, how did Catherine affect the way he works? And he says, she didn't affect the way I work, but she helped me do the work. But I don't think that's true. And I'm not calling David I'm not calling David out on this or anything. But Catherine's background in theater, and especially the background with doing theater in an environmental area, Disneyland, was that where a regular kid could go up to a character and talk to the character, and that that respect for the audience. In theater, it's one of the first places. There were no women on stage in Shakespeare's time, right? But once women became on stage, it became this much more equal situation in the theater. You need everybody. You can't, if the costume dresser isn't there, you can't get the clothes on in time for your scene. If the actor with the smallest part doesn't walk on and say his line, the whole play stops, right? So as in a theater company, we're all very dependent upon each other, and it kind of elevates the lowliest and grounds the most lofty. The greatest Shakespearean actor in the world still has to have makeup on and a costume on, and the lights have to go on, and if it's microphone has to go on if it's mic'd, and the other actors have to listen to that person. You are dependent upon everyone, and everyone contributes to that, making this thing happen, which comes and goes. A theater is wonderful because it disappears, right? It's in the moment. And everybody talks about this wonderful environment on the set of Eraserhead. And I think that's David's natural generosity. I think it's probably the respect for people that he learned when he was an Eagle Scout. But I think that the process of working and how people relate while the lights are being set up, and what's happening on the set, and how we appreciate and attract and interact with each other, is very much something that maybe Catherine gave to David by how she acted on the set. I know that Fred Elmes, in another part of the miniseries, talks about Catherine entertaining on the set, keeping, it going in those cold nights, because, David could stop shooting in the middle of a scene and go spend 45 minutes just touching up the paint on the elevator door button or something of that nature. So I believe that Catherine's nature and her style really contributed to the way that David developed his ability to interact with people. Because remember, he was a solo painter. That's what he was doing. He made a couple of short films which got him into AFI, but it's really the working with people, and again, I'm sure it's David's nature, but it's also the stylistic maybe influences of Catherine. I like to think that anyway.
Among the many great things in your work, your interview, and you mentioned it here, your interview with David Lynch is really extraordinary.
It was an honor to do that interview, actually. I think I said something about this earlier in the interview, but there's a sense as an actor, and I think all of us feel this, especially when we fall in love. We fall in love with people who get us on some level, and the way they see us helps us see ourselves in that way. And so it's easy to fall in love with someone because they're seeing the best of you, right? With collaborative work, having someone be so present that they really can absorb what you're doing, that they can feel it, that you feel like they've got it. When I showed David the compendium of the French, Spanish, and English, the scene that we actually shot as the magician in Mulholland Drive, he got it. He got it on a level that just, I knew he got it. It just, all he said is, came up to me, "That was aces, Richard." And what asked me to do a little move toward the microphone at one point, just a little bit of the choreography, a little bit of the blocking. But I could feel it. I knew it. And when we did the interview, we hadn't seen each other in a couple of years. I hadn't been invited to do anything with Inland Empire, and I didn't know what the relationship was going to be with David. I hadn't seen him for a while. And just before the interview, he rose to the top of the stairway that we shot that in his studio. It's actually a screening room and a mixing room, recording studio. And he rose to the top of the stairs and turned and went, "No hay banda." And I knew where we were. We were back into this, let's play. And, in interview technique you talked about before, one of the things that I think is important, it was important for me in all of these interviews, was in structuring the questions so that sometimes they were so unexpected in the way they were asked that you make the person think, because that's what you want. The camera wants to capture the moment that the person is grokking or coming to that idea, right? The thinking about the next word to say. Catherine was, and then it comes out. But sometimes just throwing, not trying to screw anybody up or mess anybody up, but just throw off the rhythm a little bit. We're talking about childhood, and all of a sudden we're talking about death. And if there's a relationship there, you're basically in an interview, I feel like you're opening doors that, you want to find out what's on the other side of the door, but you really want the person to come through that door and tell you, and then walk you back through that door and go explore. And it's their discoveries. It's that moment. There's one of my favorite moments in the film. This wonderful playwright, she's got a show on Broadway right now, Real Women Have Curves. She wrote the book. This is Lisa Loomer, and she talks in the film. You've seen her, a dark-haired woman. But at one moment she's saying, I was reading, Catherine told, because she remembers that Catherine gave her the book to read about death so that Catherine could get some information. And it's that moment of discovery. It's the moment that the eyes light up and the person remembers something that moved them, or that's important to them, or that's important to their answer. Those are very, very exciting moments. And to catch them, you have to be present and flexible and open to changing the whole direction of an interview, because you start going down a path that seems rich. And you can only do that if you're truly engaged and listening and flexible. And if you've done your homework, as Sandy McKendrick said years and years ago when I was in school, prepare and then you can improvise. The more notes you know where things are, the more you can use them when you're improvising. And so the preparation for these interviews was extremely important, knowing what we had, knowing what was unfilled out, and knowing about the person, and then just being there. Those were exciting moments.
When did you know you had the structure? When did it click for you as you were assembling everything together?
So let me tell you a couple of little things that'll give you a clue about this, because it's actually an interesting transitional period. When we first heard the conversation, which was 6 months into the editing process, we got that phone call sent to us, and I was working with one of our composers and producers of a lot of the music in this film. Jake Blue Note was listening to it with me, and he said two things almost immediately afterward. The first thing he said was, Richard, you've been working on this project for 3 years, and I've never understood why it was important to you, but I want to see a movie about that woman, right? Because the phone call just blew him away. Then he said to me down the line, he said, that's the way you should open the movie. And of course, that's the last recording we have of Catherine Coulson. That's the day after shooting those scenes, she makes that phone call. That's the last recording we have of her. And to open the movie with it means we've got to go back, right? So the process, I've done some research about the writing of biographical books, and it usually takes about 2 years of research and then about 2 years to write them, 4 or 5 years to make a good biography. But in those cases, you've also got a lot of material. If you're going to do something on, Abraham Lincoln, there's a lot of material you can go to. We did almost all of our research on camera. It was through the interviews with these people. So it took us a while just to come up with what her life was, just the timeline, right? So the first assembly of this piece, without any illustration, just talking head. The first assembly was 6.5 hours, and it was linear, and but it was compelling. And I got an offer for a book. Somebody wanted to publish the transcription of this 6.5 hours, right? And I had to make a decision at that point. We were still in COVID, and there were a lot of miniseries around, and I thought, this may be the best way to tell this story. Her life is so rich, and the story is so strong that we could keep the suspense going episode to episode. And so, but I also knew that a feature would be a very effective way to tell the story. And I had to make a decision, and I realized that if I cut the 3-part, we made it a 3-part at that point. If I cut that first, I could always cut it down to a feature. But if I made the feature, I would never go back and stick pieces in. It didn't make sense to work that way. So we decided to do it as the miniseries first, and we cut that. That was 3.5 years ago that we finished that. And I sent it to David, and David loved it, and, go ahead, but tighten it up, clean it up, do the color correction before you send it out. And that was about 6 months more work before we started looking for it. But everything changed. The industry changed. During COVID, a lot of money had been spent by all the streamers because everybody was home doing nothing. And long form was really, really appropriate. And then right around the time that we're ready to go and David wants to take this to Netflix, a bunch of things happened. Ted Sarandos became the CEO of Netflix, and within weeks they fired the documentary department, and what people were buying changed. And the market for films like this kind of dried up in terms of just them needing lots of content and us being able to get our budget back and have a successful film. So after, maybe 6 or 8 months later, I decided, no, we need to go with the feature. And the way I found the structure for the feature was by cutting a trailer. We were going to Chicago. I was going to be, as the magician from Mulholland DR, I was going to introduce the film. They were going to show, I Don't Know Jack, David Lynch Presents I Don't Know Jack, our other feature, that David's in and Catherine's in. And they were going to show a trailer for I Know Catherine, and I cut a trailer. I don't know why the structure came to me the way it did, but I realized out of the trailer that the story was so strong that we could tell a little bit of the story and then jump back in to give the backstory, and then tell a little bit more of the story I needed the devices to be able to keep the audience knowing when we're in the present, telling the linear forward movement of the story, and when we're going back. And you know, I all I can say is quote Picasso for a third time. First you find, and then you look, and you find these things, and then you look at how to make them work together. You know, I have some brilliant friends and people in my life who will look at my work. Jeffrey Fiskin, a brilliant writer, was very instrumental in seeing the film. Charles Rosen, a great writer, great producer from 90210, if you remember that show. Beverly Hills 90210. He was the executive producer of that for years. He gave us a lot of feedback. Other people that are in the film gave us feedback. And, you know, my team, Jake Blue Note, Jane Albichet, once we brought Alexandra Shurun, who is our art director, all the drawings that are on black background, the maps and the sketches and things, the illustrations are done by a Ukrainian artist who now lives in the United States. She's actually in the other room. We asked her to be the art director. I always felt that the most important audience, not the primary target necessarily, but the most important audience was young women. I think would be inspired by Catherine's efforts and her time before it was easier to break into the industry. It was more accepted, at least. She did this in pioneering days that she got and did what she did. I always wanted a woman's eye to be the last eye on the film before I said yes. So our first art director was a woman, wonderful Mexican national named Aja Rivera is her name. Just did some great motion graphics for us, path work and stuff. We brought other art directors, John Atkinson, Jose Juarez, I think I can't remember his last name at the moment, but just a bunch of people that really helped us do this. But Alexandra Shurun was the last person we brought in, and she tied the film together, and I very much trusted her judgment. So having that point of view at the end of the film was just super important to me, that the last person to see it was a woman, because I'm telling a story about a woman and I'm a guy. And although I think that we're all very much the same underneath all of that, there are differences and are different sensibilities. So it was important to me to have that. And I don't remember the question.
No, that was great. Yes, so you had this this way in which you and your team came together with the final structure, or I think multi-structure to the work. That's really great. That is really great. And it's I've seen only the feature length documentary version of it. I hope one day, and maybe it's already, I'm not sure, but I hope one day maybe the multi-episode series of it might come available at some point. I'm not sure. I hope so.
If enough people go to iknowcatherine.com and see the movie and want it, we will definitely want to do that. There's even interviews I'd like to add now. We never got to talk to Ray Weiss, who's a wonderful guy and has some great Catherine stories. Matchin Amick was really important also. And well, we did what we could, interviewed who we could, who was available. You know, everybody's busy, and this was coming out of COVID too, going into COVID. So yeah. I mean, I very much appreciate your dedication to seeing this film and to talking about the structure, because I think the structure is unique, and it took a lot of fine tuning and understanding. You know, you're doing something for yourself, but you have to always see it fresh, as if somebody with new eyes are gonna see it, right? Because you have all these experiences, and that's the challenge for a filmmaker. And having good people to give you feedback is important, but ultimately trusting your own gut. That's the thing I learned mostly from David on this project, more than anything else, because I think that's the way he worked, is he just trusted his own perception. You know, I've heard it said that if it wasn't for our differences, we wouldn't be different. We wouldn't notice that we're different. We would, you know, I'm Daisuke, you're Richard. What's the difference? Where do we start and stop? It's because of our little differences. And great poets express their personality, their individuality, their specific perspective and point of view so specifically that it's that specific difference that allows us to recognize ourselves. So we can see, I can see where I am because I can see where you are, and it's different than me. Oh, but that's similar to me. It's different there. Ah, I get to discover myself. I think that's why we need art. I think that's why, you know, the great minds can teach us something through books, because we're not different. We're the same. It is in the slight and subtle differences that our true natures are revealed.
I want to say too that I think it was such a lovely choice that you and your team did in the feature documentary version that I've seen, which is that among the many ways that you could have ended the work, I think you chose, or you landed upon, among the many closing grace notes that you decided to end upon in terms of Catherine Coulson. I think you landed upon, among other things, an excerpt from a speech by Frederick Elmes,
Yes.
where he was talking, right, receiving award, as a cinematographer in his work and his efforts as a cinematographer. And you ended this with the grace note about the point that he raised in his speech, thanking Catherine Coulson and acknowledging her work. I thought that was such a lovely choice. I really did.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to dedicate this award to the memory of my dear friend and colleague, Catherine Coulson. She joined the camera local at a time when female first assistants were truly rare. And I can attest, she was as good or better than anyone I had worked with. And she was my mentor and my advocate. Today she's remembered for her fine skills as an actor, including her portrayal as the log lady in Twin Peaks. I miss you, Kath, and I share this award with you.
I guess I don't want to tax your time and your patience any further, Richard. You've been so gracious with with me and your very valuable time. I thank you so much for this. I suppose maybe to close it out, what is your wish that people take from it regarding the great Catherine Coulson?
So I'll quote Lisa Loomer, who I talked about earlier, quoting Catherine. Go to the party. That this is our life, and every moment can be rich. And it doesn't have to. A moment can be tired, and all you do is sit back and relax. Meditation is about letting go of expectations and just being there with yourself and letting whatever comes up. But the idea of going to the party, make the movie, write the book, pet the dog, get the dog, go to the gym, do whatever in our lives motivates us. That's, fourth time Picasso. First you find, then you look. Find inside what you care about and pursue it. You won't be able to take the dollars with you when you die, but maybe we can take the pride of our accomplishments and the fact that we've lived these lives, that we've done these things. And so many of us are afraid to fail. So many of us are afraid to waste our time or our money. I think it's go to the party, take the opportunity, whatever comes your way, explore it and be in it and be present, which is one of the big lessons. Catherine was a big fan of now I'm going to forget his name, Baba Ramdas, a man originally named Richard Alper, who did LSD experiments with Timothy Leary back in the 60s at Harvard and became kind of a guru looking at Eastern philosophy. And he wrote a book, wonderful book. Catherine's email address was the name of this book, which was Be Here Now. And that's the thing that I have to remember in my own life every day. And when I do, I tend to appreciate what I have. It's a matter of gratitude for the time that we have and being present to exist in that time. Because, you can live 100 years. There's a book by John Trevanian called Shibumi, and my father loved this book. And he pointed out a passage to me where this Chinese Go master who's educating this young man who becomes an assassin. That's another story. But he says to the guy, be wary of the man with 20 years of experience. What he may have is 1 year of experience 20 times. And that's not to say that you shouldn't stay with the same job for 20 years. It's just be open to the newness of everything that we're doing. Be open to that next person at the checkout stand that might be a wonderful conversation and might need that conversation, or you might need that conversation. Be here now, be present, and go to the party. Live the life, do it, take the chance. Even if you fail, it's always worth it. And Kyle MacLachlan, who's wonderful in our film, talks about you don't learn anything from failure or from success. You learn it all from failure. Or it may be Mark Frost who says that. I can't remember. But the idea is be willing to take the risk. Failure is just the first attempt, the second, the third, the 10th. Keep going until you succeed in getting what you need out of it. Again, go to the party.
Richard Green, going to the party. What a wonderful way to end this conversation. I wish this could go on forever, Richard. Thank you so
Well, let's
much
have
for
another one
your
soon.
time. This is so lovely. Thank you. I've been joined by the editor, producer, director of the work I Know Catherine, the Log Lady, Mr. Richard Green. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward, hopefully, yes, to watching your work many times over and learning more from it. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Likewise. At the very end, when it's you come down and it's it's the and there's a smile and the eyebrow is raised, right? Originally, I mean, I just played it. David said, I want you to put your hands up, when this powerful sound is there, and then, somehow bring it down and just give me a strong look. And I decided, I just did it, right? But after we shot, about a week after, I get a call that they want me to go to a creature factory, a place that makes prosthetic, monster heads and bodies and stuff, and get a body cast because they were going to burn me up. So I went to this place, and it was kind of cool. It was like an airplane hangar, and they're just hanging from the ceiling are dragons and, all sorts of just crazy animals and things that this company had created over the years, right? It was very cool. And then they do a full body cast. I mean, not full body. Half my body is just in plaster with a straw for me to breathe through. It was, wild. And I fully expected that that's what they were going to do. They were going to have the magician do, something and then be burst into flames. I never discussed this with David. I don't know that it's true. Maybe the flame thing didn't work and they had to settle for the other. I like to think that they didn't use the fire thing because the look at the end was so enigmatic and powerful and so much on the money that they said, fuck that, let's use this real scene. That's my my ego fantasy, but I believe that it may be true.
That is amazing.
Somebody else, maybe Peter Deming will know whoever shot it.
That is so amazing. I feel like I got some inside info about one of the most iconic moments in one of the most brilliant works ever. Thank you so much for that, Richard. This is so amazing.